All right, so now as we get ready for the play-in round series, which it's continuing to get pushed back now, but we'll have to see what happens. We're going to worry about that later on, but we're going to take a look at the Black Ace for each NHL team in the play-in round series, a guy that nobody's really talking about that could possibly be a difference maker in their play-in round series and potentially in the entire Stanley Cup playoffs here in 2020. So we'll be taking a look at that in this video. If you like what we're doing here at Goal Line Hockey and want to see the latest news around the NHL, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and a subscribe down below. And let's take a look at the Black Ace for all 16 play-in round teams. All right, so we're talking about players that either played in the American Hockey League this season, maybe played a little bit of NHL time this year. We're also going to be looking at the guys that played in the CHL overseas that are under contract to play in North America with their team. They've already had a contract signed this year, so they are eligible to play in the play-in round. So we're going to start things off looking at the Arizona Coyotes, and one of the guys that's had more NHL experience than the rest. And he's looking like one of the better defensive prospects from his draft class. Right shot defenseman Victor Soderstrom, and he's looked like a pretty solid prospect since he was drafted by the Coyotes back in the day. The Coyotes traded up for him at the draft lottery, I believe 2 or 3 picks to pick Victor Soderstrom from the Philadelphia Flyers draft pick. They made a little move there to move up in the draft to make sure they got this player. He was actually projected to be one of their top 3 picks at that draft in the Nico Hischier, the Nico Hischier Nolan Patrick draft. He was number 3 for the Arizona Coyotes behind those two. He ended up falling to, I think it was 8 or 9, even 11 to the Arizona Coyotes. I think the Coyotes are quite happy with that draft pick, and I think he could be a difference maker here for the Arizona Coyotes. You look at that defense they have already, really starting to build that group up there in Arizona. You've got guys, that just really, you've got Oliver Ekman-Larsson, you've got Jacob Chychrun, and now you add a guy like Victor Soderstrom on the right side, a really huge asset here for the Coyotes, and I think he could be a difference maker in the play-in round. So now we look at the Carolina Hurricanes here, as they're an interesting team because they've got a couple of guys. I was thinking about honorable mentions, guys like Morgan Geekie, Jake Bean, who was rated the AHL Defenseman of the Year. But I'm going off the board a little bit here as I'm going with Nick Suzuki's brother from Montreal. He's playing with the Montreal Canadiens. We're taking a look at Ryan Suzuki, picked by the Carolina Hurricanes. This is a player that I think the Carolina Hurricanes still are just scratching the surface with him. He's playing right now in the Junior Hockey League in the CHL. I think he's going to be ready to go. They could give him an opportunity here in the play-in round. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't play. The Carolina Hurricanes have a pretty loaded offense, but they may look to give him a chance. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but this would be interesting here for the Carolina Hurricanes. So now we move on to the Columbus Blue Jackets as we're taking a look at centerman Liam Fody. Now, there's a guy who was a former first-round pick by the Columbus Blue Jackets. He's got the NHL build. He's a pretty big player, and I think the Columbus Blue Jackets may take a chance here. I believe he played a little bit this season in the NHL, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe not. But this is a guy that I think the Columbus Blue Jackets will be looking at to maybe make a difference here for their forward group. Do they see him as a better player than a guy like Brandon Dubinsky at this point on their depth chart? So he could find his way playing here in the play-in round. Now we move on to the Calgary Flames, and this is a little bit of a long shot, but I'm going with centerman Jakob Pelchier. Now, this is a guy that they just drafted in I believe the first or second round this year at the NHL draft, and I think this is a guy that they could take a waiver on. They've got some pretty solid guys in the bottom 6, but do they see him more valuable, at this point than a guy like Bennett or Backlund? Does he possibly move up the chart in their depth down the middle? Maybe he gets a chance, and they look to see what he could do at the NHL level in their play-in round series. So now we move on to the Chicago Blackhawks, and the Blackhawks have plenty of players you could pick, but I'm going with centerman Dylan Sakura. There's been a lot of hype around Dylan Sakura, and he just really hasn't found that level yet at the NHL level. Maybe this is his chance in the play-in round to possibly step in as a Black Ace here for the Chicago Blackhawks. I don't know how Stan Bowman feels about Sakura at this point. I think his hype has definitely dwindled down a little bit, but maybe that's what he needed as motivation to drive him going into this play-in round. So now we move on to the Edmonton Oilers, and this is an easy pick. I mean, let's be honest here. They're going with left shot defenseman, Swedish defenseman, Philip Broberg. And Philip Broberg will probably be playing here in the playing round. And they've got some pretty solid defensemen there in Edmonton, but I think Philip Broberg could be a huge asset here, a huge addition in the playing round in the playoffs. It just adds to that really solid depth that they have on the blue line already. And I think this is a great pickup for the Edmonton Oilers, and he could be one of the bigger names we look at here in the playing round. All right, so now we move on to the Florida Panthers, as we're going to take a look at winger Owen Tippett. Now, he spent a lot of the season with the Springfield Thunderbirds in the American Hockey League, but he spent some time in the NHL as well. I think this is a guy that the Florida Panthers have a lot of, they expect him to be a top 6 scoring winger, and he may get an opportunity here in the playing round to show that against the New York Islanders. We'll have to see what happens. I think they were expecting a little more from guys like Brett Connolly. They have Frank Vetrano in that top 6. I don't know how I feel about that. So maybe a guy like Owen Tippett gets an opportunity in the playing round just to see what he can do for the Panthers. Don't be surprised if they take a look at Tippett. So now we move on to the Montreal Canadiens as centerman Jesperi Kotkaniemi. Now this is probably not a name that's too far off the board because the Montreal Canadiens picked him early in the first round 2 years ago. And this is a guy that I think the hype has definitely dropped off there, especially in Montreal where they've got a telescope on everything there in Montreal. It's hard to get out of the limelight, especially a top draft pick like Kotkaniemi. He got sent to the Laval Rocket in the American Hockey League, and it was when his family was coming to visit him, which was kind of disappointing. But he spent a lot of the season in the NHL and just struggling to make the lineup, so they send him down to the AHL. It seems like GM Marc Bergevin, they want to put him into the lineup. He will be one of their, he will be playing a prominent role here in the playing round. We'll see if he is able to turn things around. Maybe that little stint in the AHL gave him a little bit of motivation. We'll see how it plays out, but expect Jesperi Kotkaniemi to have a little bit of a resurgence here in the playing round. So now we look at the Minnesota Wild, and this is another one where I believe he actually played a little bit with the Minnesota Wild. I believe he was in training camp last year. He was one of the final cuts. We're looking at Russian centerman Alex Kavanov. Now, this is, I believe, another first-round pick by the Minnesota Wild. There's a lot of hype around this guy, too, when he was drafted. He could be a good middle six center at the NHL level, and I think the Minnesota Wild see him as a potential asset here in this playing round against the Vancouver Canucks. This could be a great pickup here for the Minnesota Wild, and considering they're in a rebuild, they have a pretty solid prospect depth chart. Nothing to the level of what they need to become a Stanley Cup contender next season, but still, I think Alex Kavanov could be a great addition here to their forward group there in Minnesota. So now we look at the Nashville Predators as they've got right shot winger Phil Tomasino. He's been playing with the Niagara Ice Dogs in the OHL, and I think the potential around him is still he could be a top 6 forward at the NHL level. He's still fairly young. He's not necessarily NHL size yet, which may be a little bit of an issue. They may look at another black ace there in Nashville, but don't be surprised if they see Phil Tomasino jump into the group there. They need some help up front. I think Tomasino could be a great addition to the depth there for the Nashville Predators. So now we move on to the New York Rangers, and we've seen him. He played a lot of his time in the American Hockey League with the Hartford Wolfpack, but I think we could see him play a more prominent role here in the playing round. Right winger Vitaly Kravtsov. Now, he actually played pretty well in his time in the NHL with the New York Rangers, but I think that AHL time definitely gave him more seasoning, and I think he will be ready in this playing round. This is a good pickup here for the New York Rangers, a former first-round pick, and the funny thing is, I believe he was in the draft with Elias Anderson. It was either Hedel or Kravtsov, but he's looking like the better player than Anderson at this point. So definitely a good pickup by the New York Rangers, and again, they've already got a pretty solid winger, specifically a winger group with Panarin, Kakko. They've got some solid players already, but I think a guy like Kravtsov could find his way into the lineup here for the New York Rangers if David Quinn gives him that opportunity, which I think he will. But I think that's a huge opportunity for Vitaly Kravtsov. So now we move on to the other New York team, the New York Islanders, as I think they're going to be taking a very good look at either left winger Kiefer Bellows as my honorable mention, but right winger Oliver Wahlstrom. Now remember, he was the 11th overall pick when the Islanders had back-to-back picks in that Calgary Flames trade for Travis Hamonic. They had picks 11 and 12 that year. They picked up Wahlstrom and Noah Dobson. And Noah Dobson we saw in spades at this this NHL season, and you could even consider him another black ace for the New York Islanders. I believe he only played a dozen games with the Islanders this year. But Oliver Wahlstrom was once again in the American Hockey League. He struggled last year with Boston College, played a little bit with the Bridgeport Sound Tigers. He played with Bridgeport this season, put up unimpressive numbers, but maybe at the NHL level he's able to make things work. We'll see if the Islanders give him that opportunity. And based off of what Barry Trotz said, he's not super high on him yet, especially his two-way game. So we'll see what happens, but maybe he used that as motivation. We'll have to wait and see if the Islanders use him in the play-in round. All right, so now we move on to the Pittsburgh Penguins, and a lot of people have been talking about left winger Samuel Poulin. Now, I think there's a guy that the Pittsburgh Penguins could be looking at in their future in the top six. Once guys like Gensel and Sheary, they start looking for extensions, I think a guy like Poulin jumps right in there for the Pittsburgh Penguins. A former first-round pick by the Pens. I think this is a great pickup, and I think this is a guy that could be huge as a black ace for the Pittsburgh Penguins. So now we look at the Toronto Maple Leafs. This isn't much of a black ace. We know who this player is. Right shot defenseman Timothy Liljegren, former first-round pick for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And there's a guy, they need help on the blue line. Liljegren may play kind of like a Victor Soderstrom in Arizona. I think he's going to play a huge role here in the play-in round. He's just scratching the surface of his potential at the NHL level. He played a lot of the season with the Toronto Marlies in the American Hockey League. Expect a lot of things here from Liljegren. I think he could be a huge black ace for the Leafs in their play-in round. So now we move on to the Vancouver Canucks. And this is a little bit of an off-the-board pick. You could look at Gadjovich for their forward group as a guy to look at. But I'm looking at left shot defenseman, former 5th overall pick, Olli Juolevi. Now this is a long shot. I think a lot of fans out there in Vancouver are not really liking what they've seen from Juolevi since he was drafted. You could say Jet Wu could be another option. But I like Olli Juolevi. I think the injuries have really, it's hit him hard in his development. But if they give him a chance here as a black ace, this could be a nice pickup here for the Vancouver Canucks. They've got a pretty solid blue line. It might hurt, it might make the blow of losing a guy like Edler in the summer. It might make that feel a little bit better, having a guy like Juolevi in there. We'll have to wait and see what happens with Juolevi, but this could be a nice addition here in the play-in for the Vancouver Canucks. So now we move on to the final team, the Winnipeg Jets. As the Winnipeg Jets, I'm going with left winger Christian Vesalainen. Now, Vesalainen, former first-round pick, late first-round pick by the Winnipeg Jets, and he's looking like a steal for the Winnipeg Jets. A lot of potential for this guy. A great two-way game that he plays. He's got the NHL size. I think this is going to be huge for the Winnipeg Jets, just to add to that already solid depth up front. And Christian Vesalainen could be huge for the Winnipeg Jets. They've lost a lot of pieces on that blue line, but that forward group is just so good. And I think that could be the difference maker in their play-in round against the Calgary Flames. We'll have to wait to see what happens in that battle of Canada between the Winnipeg Jets and Calgary Flames. But I really like what Vesalainen has. He's got a little bit of a scoring touch, and I think this could be a huge addition in the play-in round for the Winnipeg Jets. So that's it for this video. Which black aces did I miss out of these 16 teams? Leave in the comment section down below. Who do you think for your team is the black ace? And if you like what we're doing here at Goal Line Hockey and want to see the latest news around the NHL, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and a subscribe down below. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.